Imagine you're on a routine patrol, your K9 partner by your side. Everything seems normal until he starts digging at the base of a tree. But what he uncovers beneath the soil would leave the entire town speechless. What was it? You won't believe the shocking discovery that changed everything. Before I show you what this brave K9 did next, can I ask you something small? If you believe that the truth should never be buried, please tap that subscribe button. Most people scroll past stories like this, but your one click could help this message reach someone who truly needs to hear it. Please subscribe to the channel. Officer Jacob Harris had always known that the bond between a K9 officer and their handler was more than just professional. It was built on trust, loyalty, and an unspoken understanding. Max, his German Shepherd, wasn't just a dog. He was the most reliable partner Harris had ever had. From the high-pressure situations on patrol to the quieter moments spent at the station, Max had always been by his side, whether it was sniffing out drugs, protecting him in a dangerous situation, or simply offering companionship after long hours. Max had always been there when Harris needed him the most. The bond they shared was more profound than any words could describe. They had become an inseparable team, not just in their work but in life. It was hard to imagine one without the other. Their small town was a peaceful one, nestled just outside the city, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and the quiet streets made it seem like life moved slower than in the big cities. Officer Harris loved the routine of patrolling the town. It was a job that allowed him to take in the peaceful beauty of the streets, to stop and talk with locals, and to keep things running smoothly. But that evening, something was different. It was a late afternoon, with the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over everything. The town streets were bathed in soft light, a sight that always filled Harris with a sense of peace. It was the end of his shift, and he'd already checked in with a few of the regular stops, just ensuring everything was in order. It was a typical evening, and he expected it to be like any other. Max sat quietly beside him, eyes occasionally glancing out the window as they passed familiar landmarks. The K9 seemed to enjoy these evening drives as much as Harris did, but this time something was off. Max wasn't his usual calm self. Instead of watching the world pass by, the dog was fixated on something outside the patrol car, his head turning sharply toward the park on the left side of the street. His eyes were wide, ears perked high. Harris couldn't remember the last time Max had acted this way. For a moment, Harris thought it might just be a stray animal or another dog in the distance, but Max's reaction was different. There was an urgency in the way he stared, as if something in that park had caught his attention in a way that wasn't normal. Max wasn't one to get distracted easily during their patrols, and this sudden shift in behavior concerned Harris. "What's got your attention, boy?" Harris muttered under his breath, mostly to himself. But Max didn't respond. He kept his eyes locked on the park, his body tense as if something was beckoning him. Harris's first instinct was to drive past, assuming it was nothing out of the ordinary. The town had its fair share of dogs, and sometimes they'd wander out into the street. But something about Max's demeanor stopped him. It was almost as if the dog was telling him, "This is important." The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Harris turned the steering wheel, guiding the patrol car toward the park. Max, almost as if on cue, jumped out of the car without waiting for permission. His movements were quick, controlled, and purposeful, his body language clearly indicating that this was no mere distraction. The dog's tail was stiff, held high, not in a playful way, but with focus, focused on something in that park. "Max, wait," Harris called, but the K9 was already at the edge of the park, moving with a speed and purpose that took Harris by surprise. Max was no longer trotting along leisurely. He was moving like he was on a mission. He didn't pause to sniff the bushes, or investigate a scent, or even look at a passing car. No, Max was headed straight toward the large oak tree that stood at the edge of the park. It wasn't an area Harris had paid much attention to, but now, with Max's intense behavior, it suddenly felt significant. Harris quickly followed, his boots hitting the pavement as he ran toward the tree. The entire situation was strange. Max was always calm, always the professional, never this distracted. And yet, here he was, charging toward the tree like it was the most important thing in the world. As they approached the tree, Harris noticed that Max had already begun to dig. Not just a casual dig, either. Max was clawing at the ground with determination. His paws moved quickly through the dirt, scattering it in all directions. It was the kind of digging that seemed to have a purpose, a kind of urgency that no one had ever seen in Max before. "Max, stop!" Harris shouted again, but the dog didn't stop. Instead, he continued, his paws moving faster, the sound of dirt being thrown into the air louder by the second. Harris felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't normal. There was something about this whole situation that didn't sit right. He took a few more steps forward, watching Max, confused and concerned. Had something happened to the tree? Was there a wounded animal or some other danger that Max had picked up on? But Max wasn't acting like he was hunting or searching for an injured animal. No, this was different. This felt deliberate. Harris bent down to try and call Max back again. But just as he did, Max's digging grew more frantic, more intense. The dog's claws were scraping against the earth, his body tense with every movement. Harris took another cautious step forward, now close enough to hear the sounds of Max's movements clearly. His heart raced, uncertainty creeping into his thoughts. What was going on? What was he missing? As Max continued to dig, something caught Harris's eye. It was small at first, almost insignificant, but there it was, something shiny buried just beneath the surface. Max's sharp senses had detected it long before Harris could see it. The officer knelt down beside the dog, his hands trembling slightly as he brushed aside the dirt that Max had so desperately cleared away. The moment his fingers made contact with the object, a wave of realization washed over him. It wasn't just dirt. There was something buried here, something that shouldn't be. Max had uncovered a metal object, half buried in the earth. It was small, and from where Harris stood, it appeared to be an old, rusted box of some kind. His mind raced. Why would something like this be buried under the tree? And why would Max, of all things, sense the need to dig it up? Harris felt the air grow still around him as he stared at the metal object. He instinctively knew that whatever lay inside this box wasn't just another random find. No, this was something important, something that could change everything. Max had found something that could bring answers, or more questions, and it was buried here, beneath this tree, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. Max's eyes remained locked on the object, as if urging Harris to open it. The dog's loyalty and focus were unwavering, and Harris felt a sense of duty to uncover the truth behind this strange discovery. But what was it? What could it be? With his heart in his throat, Officer Harris reached down and carefully grasped the edges of the box. He knew that opening it would mean stepping into unknown territory. He wasn't prepared for what would come next, but he had no choice but to follow Max's lead. The town, the peaceful streets, the quiet life, it was all about to change. Officer Harris's heart thudded in his chest as his fingers tightened around the metal box that Max had uncovered. It was hard to explain the tension in the air. Max, usually calm and collected, had been nearly frantic in his actions. Something wasn't right, and Harris could feel it deep in his gut. The town had always been quiet, uneventful. Nothing ever really happened here. Yet, the dog's behavior suggested otherwise. He had dug with a purpose, as if he were trying to reveal something buried for years, maybe even longer. Harris glanced down at Max, who was still standing beside him, staring intently at the box. The dog's gaze never wavered. His tail was still, his ears locked forward. Max's presence was unwavering, unshaken. It was as if he had already figured out something that Harris didn't understand yet. And yet, despite all of Harris's instincts urging him to take a step back, he couldn't ignore the pull to open the box. Something about it felt urgent. He looked around the park. It was quiet, eerily quiet in fact. The wind rustled through the trees, the last vestiges of daylight beginning to fade as the shadows of night crept in. No one else was around. There was no one to witness what was happening, just the two of them, and that thought alone made Harris uneasy. There was something inherently unsettling about discovering something so hidden and secretive, with no one to offer guidance. With a deep breath, Harris decided to open the box. The rusted metal creaked as he carefully pried open the lid. His fingers ached with anticipation, the moments feeling like an eternity as he worked the box free from the earth. As it opened, a sharp, cold breeze swept through the park, and for a brief second, Harris felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just the wind, it was the feeling of something profound being uncovered, something far beyond his understanding. Inside the box, there were a few small objects, papers, photographs, and an envelope sealed with old wax. But it wasn't just the contents that made Harris pause. It was the presence of the photograph that caught his attention. The first thing he noticed was how carefully the photo was preserved. It was old, faded, and yellowed with time, but still clearly visible. And as Harris stared at the man in the photo, he froze. The person in the photograph looked remarkably familiar. The man had an authoritative presence about him, wearing a sheriff's badge, standing in front of the very tree where Max had been digging. It didn't take Harris long to recognize who it was. It was Sheriff Daniels, the former sheriff of the town, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Harris's breath hitched in his throat. His mind raced as memories of that case flooded back. Sheriff Daniels had been an esteemed officer, respected by everyone. He was the kind of person people looked up to. But one day, without warning, he had vanished. No one had heard from him, and his case had gone cold. Harris had only been a young officer back then, but the disappearance of Sheriff Daniels had always haunted him. Could this photo be evidence of something that had happened to the sheriff? Was this somehow tied to his disappearance? Max's tail shifted slightly, a low whine escaping his throat, as if urging Harris to dig deeper. Max had always had a sharp sense for danger, for things that didn't seem right. Harris felt it in his bones. This wasn't just a random discovery. This was connected to something much bigger, something hidden from the town for years. The weight of the moment hit Harris with full force. What had Sheriff Daniels been involved in? Why had someone hidden this photograph and the other items beneath the earth all this time? Without thinking, Harris carefully removed the photograph from a box, feeling the edges crinkle beneath his fingers. He studied it for a moment, trying to make sense of it. The sheriff had been standing in front of the tree, but what else was significant about that place? Had this been where something had happened to him, or had he been trying to hide something? Harris felt a growing sense of dread, and for a moment, he wished he had never opened the box. But it was too late to turn back now. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. This photograph, this connection to Sheriff Daniels, was just the tip of the iceberg. The next object that Harris uncovered was a stack of old papers, their edges worn and torn from years of neglect. As he flipped through them, he could see that they were handwritten documents. Some of them appeared to be notes, while others seemed to be official reports. The writing was faint, almost impossible to read in some places, but Harris was determined to make sense of it. One particular page caught his eye. It had a few names scribbled at the top, all underlined with heavy strokes, as if the person who wrote it had wanted to emphasize something. Harris felt a sense of urgency build as he scanned the names. A few of them seemed familiar, while others didn't. But what struck him the most was the last name on the list, Daniels. Sheriff Daniels' name appeared on the list, followed by several others, with a series of notes written beneath. Some of the notes referred to meetings, while others mentioned something about a deal and consequences. The more Harris read, the more his stomach twisted. This wasn't just an innocent collection of forgotten papers. This was something darker. There was a sense of conspiracy, of hidden actions, and secrets buried deep beneath the surface. "Max," Harris whispered, looking at the dog. Max had remained still this entire time, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. His eyes never left Harris, as if to remind him that this discovery was just the beginning. The canine's instinct was sharp. Max knew something was wrong. He had uncovered something that was far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Harris felt a mixture of fear and determination. There was no turning back now. The discovery of the box and its contents had opened a door to a long-forgotten past, a past that, until now, had been buried beneath the weight of time. The documents were full of cryptic messages, but they held clues that could finally reveal the truth behind Sheriff Daniels' disappearance. What was the sheriff involved in? What had he uncovered that made him disappear without a trace? And why had someone gone to such lengths to hide these secrets in the first place? Before Harris could dive deeper into the mystery, another item in the box caught his eye. It was an envelope. Unlike the rest of the items, the envelope was sealed with a dark, faded wax stamp. Harris hesitated for a moment, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the envelope. This was different. This felt important. He had uncovered photographs, papers, and reports, but this envelope felt like the key to everything. Max let out another low growl, his body tense. It was almost as if the dog knew that whatever was inside this envelope would be the final piece of the puzzle. With a deep breath, Harris carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the paper inside. The letter was written in a clean, precise hand, and as Harris read the first few lines, he felt a chill run down his spine. Harris's hand trembled as he unfolded the letter, the paper crinkling under his fingers. The words on the page were crisp, but there was something in the way the message was written that sent a shiver down his spine. It felt personal, almost as if the writer had been speaking directly to Harris. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as though the person who had written it knew it would one day be found, decades after it had been written. Max's low growl cut through the silence, and Harris glanced at the dog. There was no doubt that Max could sense the weight of this moment. He had uncovered something that neither of them fully understood yet, but both the officer and his K9 companion felt the gravity of the situation. Harris's gaze moved back to the letter, and he began to read. Jacob. The letter began simply, with the officer's first name. Harris's brow furrowed. How did they know his name? If you are reading this, then you have found what I have left behind. I knew this day would come. There's no more time to waste. What I buried here was meant for you, for the person who would be brave enough to seek the truth. The word struck Harris like a bolt of lightning. Whoever wrote this knew about him. They knew that he would find it. This letter, this box, and everything within. But why? Why him? Harris glanced at Max, whose eyes remained focused on him, unwavering. It was as if the dog understood the magnitude of this discovery more than Harris did. Harris swallowed hard and continued reading. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. You were just a boy when I disappeared, but you were always the one who had the heart to find the truth. You were the one who would keep searching, no matter the cost. You've always had that instinct, that drive. I watched you grow up, and I know you'll understand why I had to do this. This wasn't just about me. It's about the future of this town, about keeping the darkness buried for as long as possible. But I can't keep it hidden anymore. There are some things that need to be exposed. Harris's pulse quickened. What was this person talking about? This wasn't just some random letter. It was a message meant for him, and it was connected to Sheriff Daniels, the man who had disappeared all those years ago. The letter spoke as though it knew Harris would find it, knew that he had the strength to uncover the truth. But what was the truth? His mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. The sheriff had disappeared under strange circumstances, but this letter hinted at something much deeper, something sinister. Harris shook his head. He had to keep reading. I know what you're thinking. You're wondering who I am and why I left this letter for you. The truth is, I can't explain everything, but what I can tell you is that this town has been built on lies. Things have been covered up by me, by others, things that were done to protect the people who were supposed to be trusted with power. But over time, the truth began to slip away, and I couldn't live with that anymore. You have to understand, Jacob, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. At that moment, everything felt like it was closing in on him. Justice, power, lies. It was too much for Harris to take in all at once, and yet, he couldn't look away. He had been drawn into something much bigger than himself, something that went far beyond the peaceful town he had always known. Max seemed to sense the shift in the air. The dog's posture grew more alert, his body tense. His ears were angled forward, as if listening for something just beyond the immediate surroundings. Harris, too, felt a shift, a change in the very atmosphere. The air felt thick, heavy with secrets. Harris shook his head again, trying to clear his thoughts. He needed to focus. The letter was telling him something crucial, and he wasn't about to stop now. There are others, Jacob, people who will stop at nothing to keep this hidden. If they find out what you've uncovered, you and Max are in grave danger. Don't trust anyone. I've left you the tools to uncover the rest of the truth, but it's up to you to finish what I started. Find the rest of the clues. The key is hidden in plain sight, but you'll have to be sharp to see it. You're not just looking for answers about me. You're looking for answers about everything that happened here. The letter's final words sent a chill through Harris. He wasn't just involved in a mystery about a missing sheriff. He was now tangled in something far darker, a web of lies that reached deep into the very foundations of the town. Who was this person? Why had they gone to such lengths to prepare him for this? As Harris stood there, the gravity of the situation hit him full force. This wasn't just about finding a missing person. This was about uncovering a conspiracy, a secret that had been buried for decades. And the more he read, the clearer it became. He was the one who was supposed to finish this. Max had led him to the first clue, and now it was up to him to piece everything together. But something about it didn't sit right. If this was truly about justice, why had it been kept hidden for so long? Why hadn't anyone done something about it years ago? Jacob, I have faith in you. You will be the one to finish this. But you must be careful. You can't trust anyone, not even your closest friends. Trust only what you find with your own eyes. And remember, you have a powerful ally by your side. Max knows what needs to be done. Trust him. The letter ended there, and Harris's hand shook as he folded it carefully back into the envelope. It felt like he had just uncovered a hidden door, one that led to a dark and twisted past. But it also felt like a door to something new, a door to a future where he could bring the truth to light. Max barked softly, snapping Harris out of his trance. The dog's eyes never left him, as if waiting for Harris to make the next move. Harris swallowed hard and looked back at the photograph, the one of Sheriff Daniels, standing in front of the tree. He had always admired the sheriff, had looked up to him as a mentor of sorts, but now he realized that there was so much more to Daniels than anyone had ever known. The sheriff wasn't just missing, he had disappeared, and Harris had a sinking feeling that the truth about his disappearance was going to be far darker than anyone could have imagined. He turned his attention to the other papers in the box. There was more to uncover, more clues to follow, and if the letter was right, everything would come to light if he just kept digging. But with every layer uncovered, the truth grew more dangerous. Max nudged Harris's hand, as if urging him to move forward. It was time to find the rest of the answers. Harris took one last look at the box and carefully placed the letter back inside. The dog's unwavering loyalty was like a beacon in the storm of uncertainty that had begun to swirl around him. With Max by his side, Harris knew he couldn't stop now. But what lay ahead wasn't just a search for a missing sheriff. It was the search for the truth behind the town's darkest secrets. And Harris was ready to uncover it, no matter what it took. The darkness of the evening seemed to close in around Officer Harris as he stood in the park, the box and its contents lying heavy in his hands. Max, his ever-faithful companion, stood by his side, alert and unwavering. The dog had known something was buried here, beneath the roots of the old oak tree, long before Harris had any inkling. But now, as Harris pieced together the fragments of the letter, the photograph, and the cryptic clues, it was becoming clear that Max had led him to something far greater than just a missing sheriff's case. This was a hidden truth that had been buried for years, and it was time to uncover it. Harris could feel the weight of the moment. He was no longer just a small-town cop doing routine patrols. He was now a man standing at the threshold of a conspiracy that had shaped the very fabric of his town. And the deeper he dug, the more unsettling the revelations became. Max's low growl broke Harris out of his reverie, and he turned to the dog. There was no mistaking it. Max was ready. He had been by Harris's side through countless dangers, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now, and both man and dog were about to embark on a journey that would change everything. But where to start? The letter had given him a clue, a thread to pull. The key to the mystery was hidden in plain sight. What had Sheriff Daniels meant by that? Harris scanned the park once again, looking for any other signs, any other clues that could point him in the right direction. The wind rustled through the trees, and the only sound that broke the stillness was the occasional scrape of Max's claws as he shifted his weight. The town, as always, was quiet, but now, everything felt different. The contents of the box had been buried for a reason. Sheriff Daniels had left behind enough for Harris to begin his investigation, but not enough to make the truth easily accessible. It was like a puzzle, one piece at a time, and every piece uncovered only led to more questions. Max barked, and Harris's eyes followed the dog's gaze. Max was focused on something in the distance, just beyond the park, where the old town hall stood. Harris felt his heart rate increase. Was this the direction they needed to go? The letter had warned him not to trust anyone, but could there be someone at town hall who had information? Without hesitation, Harris tucked the box and its contents under his arm, his mind racing as he walked back to his patrol car. Max, ever the loyal partner, trotted beside him, his steps sure and steady. The drive to town hall was short, but it felt like the longest ride of Harris's life. His thoughts churned, each turn of the wheel taking him closer to the heart of the mystery. What was Sheriff Daniels involved in? What had been buried beneath the surface all these years? And why had this conspiracy been hidden from the public for so long? As he parked the car outside the town hall, Harris noticed that the building seemed strangely empty for such a late hour. There were no lights on inside, and the usual hum of activity was absent. It was almost as if the building itself was trying to keep its secrets locked away, just like the town had for decades. Max, sensing the shift in atmosphere, remained alert as Harris walked toward the entrance. The old building loomed before him, its stone facade weathered by time. As Harris approached the door, he noticed something unusual, a faint scrape mark on the bottom of the doorframe. It looked like someone had been trying to pry the door open, but had stopped short. The mark was fresh, as though someone had been here recently. His instincts kicked in. Someone had been trying to get inside. But why? Harris pushed the door open and stepped into the darkened lobby of Town Hall. The smell of dust and age would fill the air. The hallway stretched before him, dimly lit by the flickering lights overhead. Max, his nose twitching, led the way. Harris followed, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the empty walls. They passed through the long corridor, and as they neared the offices, Harris noticed a light seeping from underneath a door at the far end of the hall. He approached cautiously, and with a quick glance at Max, he reached for the handle and turned it slowly. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was starkly illuminated by a single desk lamp. Papers were strewn across the desk, and a filing cabinet stood in the corner. its drawers slightly ajar. But it was the figure standing by the window that caught Harris's attention. The man turned as the door opened, his face masked in surprise. For a moment, Harris didn't recognize him, but then it clicked. It was Tom Rivers, the current sheriff of the town. "Evening, Officer Harris," Rivers said, his tone polite but distant. "I wasn't expecting company." The way Rivers stood, his posture rigid, immediately raised Harris's suspicions. Rivers was the man who had taken over after Sheriff Daniels' disappearance, and in all these years, he had been an authority figure Harris had trusted. But now, standing in this room, something didn't feel right. There was something off about Rivers' demeanor, something that made Harris's gut churn. "Can I help you with something, Sheriff?" Harris asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Rivers gave him a strained smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "I think you know why I'm here," Harris replied, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "Sheriff Daniels' disappearance. It's been bothering me for years. I found something today, something that might help explain everything." Rivers' eyes flickered to Max, who was standing just inside the doorway, his ears perked and his nose twitching. The dog's gaze remained fixed on Rivers, sensing the tension in the air. "What is it you think you found?" Rivers asked, his voice cool, though there was a subtle shift in his posture, just enough for Harris to notice. He wasn't acting like someone who had been caught off guard. He was acting like someone who had expected this moment to come. Harris reached into his bag and pulled out the photograph, the one of Sheriff Daniels, standing in front of the tree in the park. He handed it to Rivers, watching his reaction closely. Rivers took the photo, his fingers brushing over the faded edges. For a moment, he said nothing. His expression remained neutral, but Harris could see a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or guilt, pass over his face. Rivers placed the photo back on the desk, his fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "You don't understand, do you, officer?" Rivers said finally, his voice low. "Some things are better left buried." Harris stepped forward. "I think the people deserve to know the truth, the whole truth." A long silence hung between them, broken only by the distant sound of Max's claws clicking against the floor. Then Rivers finally spoke, his voice hardening. "Your curiosity is going to get you in trouble, Harris. You're asking questions you shouldn't be asking. Some doors were never meant to be opened." Harris's heart raced. This wasn't just about a missing sheriff anymore. It was about something much bigger, something darker. The sheriff had been involved in something that had been covered up, hidden for years. And Rivers, the man who had taken Daniels' place, was somehow connected to it. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open, and two more officers walked in, both of them familiar faces from the department. They looked at Harris, their expressions hard and unreadable. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, his tone sharp. Harris's mind raced. He was surrounded. This was no longer a simple investigation. It had turned into a confrontation. Rivers had been expecting him, and now, it seemed, the entire department was involved in this cover-up. Max growled softly, his stance protective, his eyes never leaving the newcomers. Harris knew he had to make a decision, fast. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Harris stood still, his mind racing, as Sheriff Rivers and his colleagues closed in around him. The room felt smaller, as though it was closing in on him, pushing him further into a corner. The officers' expressions were unreadable, but the subtle shift in their body language spoke volumes. This was no longer a simple investigation into a missing person. It had evolved into something much darker, something far more dangerous. Max stood beside Harris, his body tense, eyes locked on Rivers and the two other officers who had just entered the room. The dog's low growl reverberated through the silence, a sound of warning, as if to say that they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Rivers took a step forward, his face now stern. "I told you, Harris, you're getting in over your head. The sheriff was a good man, but there are things better left forgotten. You're stirring up old ghosts that should have stayed buried." Harris's grip tightened on the letter in his pocket, the one he had yet to fully read. He knew that if he was going to bring this to light, he had to push harder, dig deeper. But it was clear now that he wasn't just investigating a case. He was challenging the very power structure of the town, and that power would stop at nothing to silence him. He met Rivers's gaze, unwavering. "You're telling me this was all just for show? For all these years, people were led to believe the sheriff just disappeared." His voice was calm, but inside, his pulse was racing. He had to be careful now. Every word, every movement mattered. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, until Rivers's mouth curled into a tight smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't get it, do you? This town has always had its secrets. The sheriff wasn't the only one. There are people in power who know things about this town, things you wouldn't believe. You're just a cog in a much bigger machine." Harris could feel the gravity of Rivers' words, but it only fueled his determination. The sheriff had left behind clues, and he had come too far to turn back now. So what was he involved in? Harris asked, his voice gaining strength. "What's the truth, Rivers?" Rivers' expression darkened. "You really want to know, don't you? You're too far gone to turn back now, aren't you?" Before Harris could respond, one of the officers in the back of the room stepped forward. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "Harris, you need to leave. You're not going to get the answers you're looking for here." Max growled louder, stepping in front of Harris, as if to say, "We're not going anywhere until we get answers." Harris patted the dog's head, but didn't take his eyes off Rivers and the other officers. "I'm not leaving," Harris said firmly, his voice a mix of defiance and resolve. "I'm getting to the bottom of this, and you're not stopping me." Rivers' face twisted into a scowl, but he didn't speak. Instead, he nodded to the two officers who had entered the room with him. They moved forward, their hands resting near their holsters. It was clear that Rivers had no intention of letting Harris leave with the truth. In that moment, Harris knew that this was no longer about solving a case. It was about survival. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Harris's mind raced as he considered his options. He had to think quickly. There was no way he could let Rivers and his men intimidate him into submission. He knew too much now, and there was no turning back. The conspiracy that had been buried for so long was about to be uncovered, and no matter what it took, he would be the one to do it. Max, sensing the shift in the air, suddenly lunged forward. Harris grabbed the dog's harness, pulling him back just in time. The officers flinched, their hands moving toward their weapons, but Harris held his ground. "You don't want to do this," he said, his voice low but firm. Rivers stepped closer, his eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "I'm giving you one last chance, Harris. Leave now before things get ugly." Harris could see the determination in the sheriff's eyes. He wasn't going to let him go easily, but Harris wasn't about to back down either. He had a piece of the puzzle now, and he wasn't going to stop until he had all the pieces. "Not until I get answers," Harris said, his voice unshaken. He turned to Max, his hand still resting on the dog's back, and nodded. "Stay close, Max." Max's ears perked up, and he stood beside Harris, ready for whatever was about to come. There was no doubt in Harris's mind. Max knew what was at stake. The bond between man and dog was stronger than anything the officers in the room could throw at them. "All right, fine," Rivers said with a resigned sigh. "You want to know the truth? Fine. You're not going to like it." He paused, as if trying to weigh whether or not to continue. The air in the room seemed to freeze, every word hanging in the balance. "The sheriff wasn't just investigating crime," Rivers finally said, his voice quiet, almost conspiratorial. "He found something that no one was supposed to know. And he wasn't the first to find it. There were others before him, and each one of them disappeared." Daniels got too close to the truth. He started asking questions that no one wanted answered. Harris leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The key to the mystery was right in front of him. Rivers continued, his voice tinged with a mix of regret and fear. "This town was built on a secret, a dangerous secret. The founding families. They made deals with people who had power, real power, and the sheriff was digging into that. He was about to expose something that would shake everything to its core. That's why he disappeared. He knew too much." Harris felt a chill crawl up his spine. What kind of deal? What did they do? Rivers took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for what he was about to reveal. "The founding families of this town, my family included, were involved in more than just local politics. They made deals with, well, people who weren't exactly above board, people who had their own interests, the kind of people who would do anything to protect their secrets. Sheriff Daniels was going to blow the lid off it all. That's why we had to make him disappear. And if you keep digging, Harris, well, you'll end up just like him." Harris's mind reeled. This wasn't just about corruption or a missing person anymore. This was about a network of power, manipulation, and deceit that stretched back generations. The sheriff had stumbled upon something that threatened to expose everything, something that would tear the town apart. And now Harris had to decide whether he was willing to risk everything to uncover the full truth. Rivers' admission left Harris shaken but resolute. He knew that this was the moment where everything would change. The decision was no longer about uncovering the truth. It was about whether or not he was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. "We have to go public," Harris said, his voice steady now. "We can't let this secret remain hidden any longer. The town deserves to know what really happened." Rivers shook his head slowly. "It's too late for that, Harris. You can't fight a battle like this. You'll lose." Harris's eyes burned with a new intensity. "I'm not backing down," he said. "You've already lost." In that instant, Max sprang forward, lunging toward Rivers and the two officers. The room erupted into chaos as Harris grabbed for his weapon, but before he could react, the officers backed off, their hands raised. Max's presence was enough to shift the power dynamic in the room. He was a constant reminder that there was more at stake than just a job. There was a truth, and it had to be revealed. As Rivers stepped back, Harris's heart pounded with a mix of fear and triumph. The dog had done his part. Now it was up to Harris to finish what Daniels had started. He wasn't about to let the town be silenced by fear anymore. Harris turned to the officers, who were still in the room. "Get out, now, or I'll make sure you're held accountable for every lie you've told." The officers hesitated, but Max's growl was enough to push them toward the door. One by one, they filed out, leaving Harris and Rivers alone. Harris stood tall, Max by his side, ready to face whatever came next. The truth was finally out there, and he wasn't going to stop until every piece of the puzzle was in place. Rivers, standing at the threshold of the room, paused and looked back at Harris. "You'll regret this," he said softly, his voice tinged with something like sorrow. Harris's response was unwavering. "Maybe, but someone has to tell the truth." And with that, the door slammed shut behind them, and a deep silence enveloped the room. Officer Harris stood at the center of the town hall, Max by his side, his fur bristling with the residual tension from the confrontation. His heart was still racing, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but the storm in his mind was just beginning to settle. Rivers and the other officers had left, but the weight of what had just transpired was far from gone. The truth was out in the open now, but what could Harris do with it? He had learned enough to understand the breadth of the conspiracy, but he still had no idea what the full scope of it was, or how deeply the corruption ran. Sheriff Daniels had tried to uncover the same truth, only to be silenced. Harris knew that whatever came next would be dangerous, and if he wasn't careful, he could end up the next person to disappear without a trace. But something about the situation, something about the way Max had reacted, the way they had stood their ground in that office, told him that this wasn't a fight he could back down from. This wasn't just about one man or one case. This was about the future of the town, the legacy of every person who had lived in it, and the bloodlines that had worked to keep its secrets buried for so long. Harris glanced down at the box, still tucked under his arm. The letter, the photograph of Sheriff Daniels, the torn newspaper clippings. It was all here. Every clue needed to expose the darkness lurking beneath the town's placid surface. But Harris couldn't do this alone. He knew now that he would need help, not just from Max, but from someone he could trust, someone who wasn't afraid to see the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. The first person that came to mind was Emma Hayes, the local reporter. Harris had known her for years. They had crossed paths countless times, and while Emma was relentless in her pursuit of the truth, she was also known for her integrity. She had always stood up for what was right, even when it put her career, or worse, her life, on the line. The decision was made. Harris turned to Max, giving him a brief nod. "We need to talk to Emma. She's the only one who can help us make this right." Max wagged his tail once, as though he agreed wholeheartedly. Harris knew it wasn't going to be easy to convince Emma. Her job as a reporter meant she was used to investigating things no one else wanted to, but even she would be reluctant to get involved in something as dangerous as this. After all, Rivers wasn't just a sheriff. He was a part of a network of power, and the people in that network would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Harris gathered the box's contents into his bag, checking each piece carefully as he prepared to leave the office. He knew that once he stepped out of that room, there would be no turning back. The town would never be the same again, and neither would he. The next morning, Harris met with Emma Hayes in a small, quiet cafe on the edge of town. The place was barely busy, and the soft hum of the morning crowd added to the feeling of tension in the air. Max sat beside Harris, his body alert and his eyes constantly scanning the room. He had always been an excellent judge of character, and today was no different. Emma was already seated at a corner booth, her laptop open in front of her, a half-empty cup of coffee beside it. As soon as she saw Harris approach, she gave him a look of concern. She had always known him as the tough, no-nonsense officer who kept the peace. But today, something about him seemed different. There was a weariness in his eyes, a sense that he was carrying a burden far heavier than any case he had ever worked on. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Emma said, raising an eyebrow as she gestured for him to sit down. Harris didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need your help," he said simply, pulling the box from his bag. Emma looked at him quizzically, but then her eyes fell on the box, and something shifted in her expression. She leaned forward, the journalist in her coming to life. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice low. "I need you to help me expose something," Harris said, his voice steady. "It's bigger than just a missing sheriff. It's a conspiracy that's been hidden in this town for generations, and I've got proof." Emma's eyes narrowed, and she glanced at Max, who sat quietly by Harris's side. She could see the intensity in the officer's eyes, the same intensity that came when he was on the trail of something serious. "Is this connected to Sheriff Daniels?" Emma asked. Harris nodded. "Yes, Daniels found out too much. He started asking the wrong questions, and then he disappeared. He's not the only one who's gone missing because of this. There are others, and I think I'm next if I don't get this information out there." Emma leaned back in her seat, her fingers tapping the table thoughtfully. "I don't know, Harris. This sounds like something that could get both of us killed. The people behind this are powerful, and if they find out you're onto them—" "I know," Harris said, cutting her off. "But it's the truth, Emma, and the people of this town deserve to know what's been going on. If we don't act now, everything Daniels worked for will be lost." Emma stared at him for a long moment, her eyes studying him intently. She could see the weight of the decision on his shoulders, the same burden she had carried many times before when choosing between doing the right thing and protecting her own safety. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "All right, Harris, I'm in, but we do this my way. We need evidence, we need witnesses, and we need to make sure this gets out to the public before they can shut us down." Harris felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had known Emma was the right person to turn to, and now, with her help, he finally had a chance to uncover the whole truth. Over the next few days, Harris and Emma worked together tirelessly, sifting through the evidence that had been left behind by the sheriff. Max, always by their side, helped them navigate the labyrinth of documents, old photographs, and cryptic letters. Emma's investigative skills came into play as she dug deeper, using her resources to track down people who might have known something about the secret deals made between the town's founding families and shadowy figures in the past. As they pieced together the truth, they discovered that the town's foundation had been built on a series of shady agreements, deals made with corrupt politicians, criminals, and power brokers who had profited from the town's growth. Sheriff Daniels had uncovered a financial trail that linked some of the town's most respected citizens to illegal activities, including money laundering, arms dealing, and even human trafficking. These were the things that had been hidden for decades, covered up by those in power who stood to lose everything if the truth ever came out. Harris couldn't believe it. He had lived in this town his whole life, and to think that it had been built on such a foundation of corruption was unimaginable. The more they uncovered, the more the web of lies seemed to grow, and soon, the scope of what they were dealing with became clear. This wasn't just a case of a missing person. It was a systemic issue, a cancer that had festered in the town for years. With Emma's help, Harris knew the time had come to act. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The pieces were all in place, and they had gathered enough evidence to expose the truth. But the danger was real. The people responsible for this conspiracy were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Harris had no illusions about the risks, but the people needed to know the truth. They called a press conference, and with the help of local news stations, the story began to break. Emma's article, titled "The Dark Truth Behind Our Town's Foundation," went viral within hours. What followed was a storm of media attention, public outrage, and legal investigations that would rock the town to its core. The revelations that came to light were nothing short of catastrophic. Longtime town officials, once pillars of the community, were arrested for their involvement in the criminal activities that had plagued the town for decades. The town was forced to reckon with its past, its future uncertain. As for Officer Harris, he knew that his life would never be the same. He had brought the truth to light, but it had come at a heavy cost. Yet, standing beside Max, as they watched the town slowly begin to rebuild itself from the ashes of corruption, Harris felt a sense of peace. He had done the right thing, and that was worth everything. If you were shocked by this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more incredible, heart-stopping tales. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to hear about the power of loyalty and truth. See you in the next one.